As Cara says, I'm Nigel Hallam. I'm the service manager for the Workplace Parking Levy in Nottingham City Council. For the Q&A session, we're going to be joined by Jason Gooding, who is the head of parking fleet and transport operations in Nottingham. And he's the one man who's seen the levy from beginning to end, so has an absolute wealth of knowledge that we're very willing and able to share with yourself. I've been asked for this session to actually move away from talking in detail about technical scheme development and actually sort of just come from the perspective of sharing some of the tips and best practice that we've learnt in Nottingham, not least of all trying to identify whether or not a WPL scheme is right for your area, because it won't be right for every area, and there's no suggestion that we would say it is. We're going to have plenty of time for Q&A if anybody's got any technical details, and it goes without saying my email address is in the last slide. Anybody who wants to get in touch after the presentation to talk more about the levy and in a lot more detail, I'm more than happy to spend that time with you. But thanks for bearing with us. So why WPL for Nottingham? Back in 2007, a major report done by Atkins said that congestion was costing the city of Nottingham £160 million a year. And half of that cost was borne directly by employers in terms of delay to the supply chain. In Nottingham, probably like many other areas, 70% of peak period congestion is by commuters, and a lot of those are employees going to work and obviously from work in the afternoon and evening. Congestion was forecast to grow 15% by 2021, and there was a very real risk that the local economy in Nottingham could be choked by that congestion issue. So what did our leaders in Nottingham want in terms of the aspiration for the future? We wanted attractive alternatives to the car. We very much wanted to develop a high quality and affordable public transport system in order to protect the commerce and inward investment into the city, but also improve the city's environment and sustainability. And all that was in the context of the start of these massively shrinking grants from central government. So therefore, generating a local reliable revenue stream was very, very important. And it's actually, as we all know, become more important in subsequent years. So I'm actually going to say, well, how have we done in Nottingham, which is this normally comes at the end of my presentation. And there's many reasons why I've been asked to address you about the WPL scheme. And probably the key one is it's because it's been a fantastic success. Despite the many people said it would fail, it would drive businesses out of Nottingham, absolutely not. Nothing could be further than the truth. And some of the stats on this slide shows the key deliverables from the scheme, and not least of all the one I've put in red, because the world's moved on. The imperative now, as we all know, is about restraining and reducing carbon emissions. And to save that tonnage in carbon emission is quite a startling statistic from a very, very relatively modest scheme. But there's always been some major highlights in terms of the scheme's performance. Namely, we've delivered 100% compliance by liable employers since year one of the scheme, and we've never gone below that 100%. Out of that £83 million, I've had to write off less than £10,000 in bad debt. So we've got a debt collection rate of not greater than 99.9% of revenue, which is startling. And my council tax colleagues hate it when I talk about that success. That's very, very important, because if you look in the context of we've not had to take any enforcement action against a single employer in Nottingham, formal enforcement action, i.e. civil or criminal offence. That's because we've very much had a compliance-focused approach with employers. We're happy to sit down with them on numerous times for as long as it takes, wrap our arm metaphorically around them and support them to get, to meet their legal obligations in terms of the scheme. And that's proven to be very, very successful. The WPL itself is very, very efficient and effective to run. We operated pre-COVID at less than 5% of revenue. And that's because it's a licensing scheme and doesn't require any expensive infrastructure. You look at the London congestion charge, a very different scheme, but massive inward investment required, massive operating costs to run it. We've managed to continue with our link bus service despite going through a double dip recession. And we've actually achieved a 47% reduction in the forecasted congestion growth. And that's actually saved businesses around £7.5 million a year directly that they would have incurred through congestion. And it's actually saved the city of Nottingham around £15 million a year. A lot of people say to myself and Jason, they have done over the years, if yours scheme is so successful, why has nobody else done it? And one of the reasons was they're waiting for some independent academic evaluation of our scheme. That's now been done. It's been done for a good few years now. And two of the key findings out that major independent academic evaluation has said the WPL has had a containing effect on congestion growth in Nottingham. And perhaps more importantly for your politicians and your senior officers, the WPL has not damaged inward investment. In fact, the contrary is the evidence, because the excellent public transport options that Nottingham has delivered because of the levy are a definite attractor for employers to locate or relocate into Nottingham. And also the fact that we've had this massive investment into an electrified and integrated public transport system has meant that we've been the first city to have its air quality management plan approved by central government. And the important thing for us is that's without the need for a charging clean air zone. WPL is a very different approach. And what is it? It's a demand management tool that disincentivises employers who provide workplace parking. And it does that through placing a modest charge on that provision of parking spaces, with a view to then reducing that supply and encouraging more sustainable modes of transport by their employees that make up an awful lot of that 70% peak period congestion problem. Our current charge for the levy in Nottingham is £428 a piece. And one of the key things that satisfied or went a long way to appeasing our employers, who quite understandably were against it because it is a tax, is that all the revenue raised by the levy has to be spent on locally identified transport improvements, normally contained in the local transport plan. That is absolutely massive and went a long way when we were doing the consultation engagement with employers. People have said Nottingham's anti-car and anti-car as a city. Absolutely not. However, it's pro-cycling and proactive travel. A higher WPL charge would have a stronger demand management effect, but there's obviously a balance to be struck with the ambitions for each scheme and the possible impacts on the wider community and businesses itself. Ahead of COVID, 53% of all liable parking places in Nottingham were subject to a car park management scheme. So that means we've engaged and supported employers to introduce car park management, where the actual cost of the levy is passed on to the vehicle user. And that's where you get your biggest demand management effects. There's also been a little bit of unforeseen positive impacts in terms of reviewing land assets. Many big employers, directly because of the levy, reviewed their land assets. For example, Nottingham Trent University, that are a city centre based university with multiple campuses in a tightly constrained area, as a result of the levy, changed what was quite a dilapidated and crime-ridden car park. And on that piece of land now sits a number of fantastic halls of residences that massively enhance the image of Nottingham Trent University. They're offered to their students, and also a revenue generating option for them as well. So really, really positive in terms of behaviour change. We've supported employers throughout the life of our levy, and we're still doing. We're in year 10 now. We provide a comprehensive business support package, and we have a WPL funded travel planner who, amongst other things, provides car park management advice, journey planning, lots and lots of support. And he also manages a WPL funded grant budget where we will match fund employers to actually implement things like cycle shelters, but not just cycle shelters, showers for people running, walking, cycling, drying cabinets for those people who are doing that in inclement weathers. And we now have morphed the WPL with some other grant funding, and we actually offer up to £25,000 to employers to implement ultra-electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And they are always oversubscribed every single year. So what have we learnt in Nottingham? Oh, crikey, so much. Political buy-in, WPL, and we're in year 10 in Nottingham, but it's still contentious as a subject up and down the country. It's not a scheme for the faint-hearted politician who might be nervous whether they're going to get voted in at the next elections. There will be challenge, there will be opposition. They've got to be resolute. One of the key things is there must be a vision. As I've said, WPL revenue is legally hypothecated to those state and local transport aims. So there must be a clear and identified vision of what WPL is intended to deliver. An authority would not get a scheme approved where they just wanted to generate a revenue stream without any clear idea of where that money's going to go. I'm working with a number of local authorities, as is Jason, up and down the country, and I see massive vision and ambition across the country at political and senior officer level. The challenge for all of us in the public sector is where and how does that funding come from to do what you want to do? Early consultation with employers is going to be key to getting the heart and mind argument communicated. We did a lot of soft engagement with major employers and business representatives to gauge their thoughts, Chamber of Commerce, Federation of Small Businesses, etc. There's a far greater impact, a recognition of the impact of congestion now amongst businesses, and there's a massive groundswell of public opinion that very much recognises the damage poor air quality does to the environment and to public health. And there's this pressing need to take decisive action to reduce carbon emissions. Our experience of supporting other authorities who are either considering or have begun their WPL development journey is that business is much more receptive to the idea of a WPL as long as they can see what the benefits are going to be. And that brings you back to the need for a very, very clear vision of what the WPL is wanted to achieve in your particular areas. As WPL pioneers, you would fully expect we had to be extremely thorough, and we went down every rabbit hole to investigate multiple options to raise the revenue required to deliver our transport vision before we selected WPL as the preferred option. We faced huge and consistent opposition from employers, and the WPL was front page headlines locally for several years. And that reinforces the need for politicians who believe in and are committed to the WPL. In Nottingham, we prepared a comprehensive outline business case, which was used during the formal 12-week public consultation, which we opened up to everybody. And when I say everybody, I mean worldwide. And that included a 3-week examination in public, which we actually had a independent transport planner chair. And post that formal consultation, the independent transport planner prepared a very comprehensive report with a number of key recommendations that the City Council reviewed and largely incorporated into a final business case, which was submitted to the Secretary of State for Transport, because any scheme has to have sign-off by the Secretary of State for Transport in England and Wales. So it took us a lot of time and a lot of money in Nottingham to develop our scheme. It took on and off around 9 to 10 years, and it cost over £8 million. But by gum, it hasn't half been worth it. Local authorities now face the huge challenge of improving air quality, and many have declared the climate emergencies. And again, that challenge for us all is how do you raise the finance to do what you're being mandated to do by a central government and what your own local politicians want to do for their citizens. How can we support in Nottingham? Well, we have a wealth of experience and expertise from key individuals involved in WPL scheme development, implementation and operation, going right back to the very beginning. We'll obviously we can share what we did well, but arguably with anything, most importantly, is what we've learned and what we might do differently based on our experiences. WPL is very, very flexible. There's some high and overarching legislation, but the actual scheme details are flexible and will be tailored to the needs and makeup of every individual authority. WPL is scalable up and down. You can have a higher charge than ours, you can have a lower charge than ours. You could do the whole of the administrative boundary like we did. You could do little pockets if that's what you want. It's really, really flexible, and that's a key strength. What we've been doing in terms of sharing our knowledge, we're now doing feasibility studies, and we've done a few to assess a local authority's readiness to begin WPL development or not. And as part of that, we prepare a bespoke route map that identifies 3 stages necessary to successfully deliver a WPL scheme. Those stages are your first scheme development. Stage 2 is the consultation and business case submission to DFT stage. And stage 3 is the implementation and operation. And within each stage, we identify the individual stages and activities that are necessary to complete each stage. And we will actually put a cost and resource requirement and the timescales for those. So it's very, very clear that people are going in with their eyes wide open if they want to do this. We can also support, and we are doing, certainly with our colleagues in Leicester, at each stage of the route map through the provision of expert and experienced resources, and we're acting as critical friend throughout. We're also ready, willing and able to share key documents that we did in Nottingham, such as the outline and final business cases, our consultation documents and approach, the WPL scheme order that we delivered, and all aspects of scheme design, such as geographical analysis, charging considerations, exemptions, discounts, and a number of different operating models that we now operate. We're now actively working with Leicester City Council, who are actually well progressed in stage 2 of the route map and are going to formal consultation later this year. We're also advising Hounslow Borough Council And last year we did a big piece of work with Get Wellington Moving in New Zealand, such is the attraction of the levy. We've got testimonials and references available, and we've recently submitted another feasibility study to a major English city, and we've submitted proposals to 2 other cities. So people are recognising that if you want to consider a WPL, come and talk to the only people who've done it. We're a local authority. We are like you. We want to support you. We also have got vast experience in conducting parking surveys. And as a result of the COVID lockdown, we've actually developed a desk-based parking survey product because, during COVID, you couldn't go out and do parking surveys with feet on the ground. That uses academic multiple regression analysis, and that models independent variables in different areas against Nottingham's live WPL licensing database. And that's a proven academic technique, and Leicester are actually using the products of that in their business case that they're going to be taking to formal consultation later this year. So, final slide. We're a multi-award winning scheme. We've got a successful model that's already being followed by other local authorities, and we want to share to make things easier for you. We feel if you followed the Nottingham WPL model, you'll deliver a WPL scheme a lot quicker than we did. We've got that massive amount of expertise to draw upon that we want to share with local authority colleagues, both in the UK and abroad. And in terms of timescales, we now believe you can deliver a WPL scheme from start to finish in 3 to 4 years within one electoral cycle. Cost effectively, by using our learning and expertise, you massively reduce your costs. You're going to generate revenue far earlier than if you did a scheme from yourself from ground zero. If you were to develop a scheme, we think £400,000 to £900,000, depending on the size of the scheme, that would pay for itself within the first few months of WPL operation. It will generate a substantial amount of money. But perhaps the key attractor, especially for the politicians and the council's senior officers, is that you would develop a scheme with minimal risk, as you're going to be replicating a tried and tested scheme that will be tailored to fit in your areas. So thank you for listening. If you're a local authority and would like to know more, then please get in touch with myself. I'm happy to speak with you. And then I'll pass it back to you, Karen, and looking forward to having questions for myself and Jason.
Thank you very much, Nigel, for that. If you want to stop sharing your screen, that would be great. So Nottingham actually won an Ashton Award in 2017 for their brilliant work on this scheme. And I think what's, as Nigel said, particularly attractive about it is that it is revenue generating, and those sorts of projects are short in supply in terms of then funding the active travel and public transport improvements that Nigel talked about. So we are beginning to get some questions. I'm going to take those. Please do upvote them using the buttons on the right of the screen. I suppose it's an interesting point from Elizabeth May about the strategy of what type of, I suppose, congestion charge schemes, workplace parking levies. They kind of tackle different people. Thinking about the weekend and shoppers and visitors to the city, is congestion an issue then? How are they dealt with? Have you got plans to look at charging those type of drivers?
Yeah. Thanks to Elizabeth for her question. The WPL scheme has a number of exemptions and discounts. One of the key exemptions is for customers. We don't want to inhibit businesses operating, and the last thing we want to do is penalise customers. So a huge supermarket, for example, let's say Sainsbury's, for want of a better name, they have a massive car park. 10% might be occupied by their staff. The WPL liability is only for the employees of Sainsbury's when they're parked. So customers an exemption, no requirement for Sainsbury's in that example to licence for them. We don't penalise customers at all. They park as they are now, regardless of the levy.
And can I just ask about congestion at weekends? Is that an issue in Nottingham, or is it primarily during the working week?
Peak period congestion, as you would expect, Cara, most employees tend to work Monday to Friday, and our levy applies 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But But you have, in terms of the licensing for employees, it's what we call the maximum vehicle occupancy. So it's when their car park is the busiest by any of the liable categories, that's what their levy liability is. But congestion and poor air quality is there, isn't it, all the time? And that's what we need to try and tackle.
Yeah, and to Elizabeth's second question about sort of commercial car parks, and I guess where Elizabeth is going from is that is obviously an aim needs to be to reduce the number of cars in our cities, because if we don't do that, then we're not really going to tackle the carbon emission question sufficiently. Are there any plans to look at the kind of commercial car parking sector?
Yeah, no, commercial car parks are included in the WPL because the levy obligation applies to individual employers. So let's say Nigel Hallam, Accountants Limited, I have 15 contract car parking places, an NCP car park. I have to license for the levy, and because I provide 11 or more places, I have to pay for those places. That's on top of their car park fee to NCP. So we very much include those. Often in high value businesses, city centres don't have that much land, so they are in these contract car parks. And yes, they are liable to the levy, and we do operate compliance and enforcement procedures with those employees through good working relationships with the car park operators.
Thank you. And then, so thinking about the getting the public on board, which, as we know from things like low traffic neighbourhoods and all sorts of other schemes to minimise traffic, can be incredibly contentious. Kind of what did you have pushback at the beginning? How did you deal with that? How did you engage businesses and the public?
I don't think from a business perspective we had pushback. We had a granite wall to try and overcome. As you can imagine, we were the first people to try and do this. Business was saying, this is a tax on business. What we very much did, though, we linked it to what business wanted to see in terms of their transport aspirations. So in Nottingham, we've got a very successful tram line 1, and the employers wanted that tram line extending into a tram network. We'd also got a railway station that was in very much need of redevelopment to bring it into a fit state for a 21st century hub. Those two top transport ambitions were exactly what the City Council wanted to deliver. So we said to employers, we both want the same thing. How are you going to pay for it? So, and then we looked at where, who's providing the problem, who's contributing to the problem. If employers don't have a disincentive to manage their own car parks and try and reduce that number, then things aren't going to get better. You're not going to tackle congestion. You're not going to tackle your carbon emission issue. So the vision is really important, Cara. How are you going to improve things? And we were very successful that we had a clearly defined division. We said we want to redevelop the tram line and extend it into a network. We wanted to redevelop Nottingham train station into a 21st century integrated transport hub. So in Nottingham, you can get off a train within 2 minutes, you jump on a tram and you can go in 3 different directions. Which is absolutely fantastic. And also we said we wanted to continue to support the Link bus network, which is basically buses that the council buys, pass them to Nottingham City Transport, which is an arm's length company, and they operate those buses on our behalf. Doing routes that aren't well served by the public transport, commercial public transport operators who tend to work on a hub and spoke principle in the more linear lines in and out. We would go to the areas that weren't as well served by the tram, those businesses, those citizens, because Nottingham's got a much higher rate of householders who don't have access to a private vehicle. So we would have these buses, they would weave in and out, and they would weave back in. They covered all those areas. Those that Link bus network provision would have massively reduced during the recession and the way things are. Because of WPL, we've been able to keep it fully funded. And it's one of the reasons we've got one of the largest electric bus fleets in the UK.
Mm. And what about actually communicating that to the public? How did you do that? How the general resident living in Nottingham, how much do they know about the workplace parking levy?
Well, we obviously did a full public consultation that you're statutorily obliged to do, Cara. But as I've said in the presentation, the WPL was a topic of interest and was on the front page of our local newspaper every day for a period of years. A lot of it were the people who were saying, no, it's not good for Nottingham, it's going to drive businesses out. However, the analysis that's been done since the tram network was extended, for example, has been that people who are unemployed and the disabled community have now got much better access to public transport provision that's high quality and affordable, that gives them access to employment opportunities. But more importantly, in particular, this came out with the disabled survey, to better employment opportunities. So there were some real social benefits, as well as regenerating 6 major areas. 55,000 employees are within 800 metres of a tram stop in Nottingham. And it's generated hundreds of millions in terms of the tram construction as well. A lot of long-term unemployed were taken on by the constructors, given apprenticeship. A great many of those have been able to retain those jobs once the tram construction was finished after 3 years. So a huge amount of social benefit, Cara, huge.
And just thinking about these sort of trends going forwards, and I don't know to what extent you've modelled this about increased working from home. Is that something, do you think, that's going to affect your revenue? What's happened with that over the course of the pandemic and more recently?
Yeah, it's obviously affected revenue, Cara. I obviously am responsible for delivering the WPL in Nottingham. We saw a reduction of liable places by around 50% during that first lockdown. I think it's great that the employers have had a chance to see how home working can operate or not within their business environment. And the fact that, I look at those news stories from sort of April, May last year, where the goats were coming down, or the cattle, the sheep were coming down from the hillside and munching on people's gardens because, the traffic was not on the road. So there's a much bigger vision here, isn't it? It's about sustainability for the planet going forward. And if employers can take advantage of home working, which means there's less vehicles on the road, we will model our WPL accordingly, and we'll do a financial remodel. We are seeing week on week increases in returns to work. A lot of people at the moment still seem to be not reticent to get on the buses. They seem to be more reticent to get on the tram. And therefore, I think a lot of people at the moment might be driving in, whereas they previously used public transport. I hope that when they get more confidence, the vaccination program, etc., then, normal travel behaviour will return. But I definitely see a long-term behaviour change will be reduced from where we were pre-COVID, but for the environment that can only be a positive thing.
So I suppose that links to Christopher's question here. So the reduction in journeys to work is great. Presumably this reduces revenue and investment opportunity. How will this be managed as reductions continue? So thinking about that sort of investment opportunity.
Yeah, for Nottingham, I mean, the levy has brought in around £650 million of inward investment, and a lot of our money is pre-committed with the ongoing financing of the tram scheme redevelopment, which was a £570 million PFI project. So it was absolutely huge, and we've obviously got ongoing financial commitments toward that. However, what we have seen is that reliable revenue stream, and we've still got a very reliable revenue stream. I'm still bringing in multi-million pounds, even at the worst parts of COVID. I was bringing in £6 million a year, and that's improving year on year. What we've found is in Nottingham, that reliable revenue stream has allowed us to match fund to bring in grants, and it's allowed us to prudentially borrow at the cheaper rates to do the bigger projects. So yes, everybody's going to have to remodel. People starting again, though, they start from where we are now. They will model with the current environment. And that's something they would sit down and talk to us. We'd support them with.
Great. I just wondered, I know Jason's online as well, and that he's responsible for the fleet electrification. And I wondered perhaps if we could just hear a bit more about that, because I know that Nottingham's been quite, setting the pace on fleet electrification. So if we can, let's just see if we can bring Jason in, is the question.
Yeah.
If you could
I know a little bit, but nothing like the amount that Jason does.
Yeah,
Put me on the spot for that one.
If you could just allow, if you share your audio and video, I think that should allow you to come in. Don't know if Nigel.
What I would say is Nottingham is leading on fleet electrification. We've now got, I forget the number of vehicles, but we've now got dozens of cage tippers that are fully electrified. We've now got the refuse collection vehicles that are fully electrified, and we've established the UK's first national electric vehicle service centre, which is servicing all our fleet of electric vehicles, but it's open to the public as well and is becoming increasingly well used. And my colleague Matt Ralph, the manager of the Change and Innovation team, has drawn up a national guidance document that enables councils to buy into that and draw upon the benefits of scale that we all have as local authorities when procuring electric vehicles. And I'd be happy to route anybody who's interested in increasing their electric fleet to come to me, and I'll put them in touch with Matthew Ralph.
Great.
So I apologise, Jason. I don't know where Jason is, but he it's another one of his areas, and he knows an awful lot more than I do.
Okay. Jason, if you are there, just make your presence known in the chat and we'll see if we can get you connected. In the meantime, there's another question about the politics of all this. Is there cross-party political buy-in, or is the Workplace Parking Levy a political football? Could an election with a change result in a change of heart? And is there a champion promoting the scheme? Officer, well, I think it goes without saying, Nigel and Jason are both promoting it, but also politically within Nottingham City Council. Yeah,
a good point. And politics always has an impact, doesn't it? It was a Labour administration that introduced the idea of a WPL in the Transport Act 2000. Our scheme was signed off by the then Labour Secretary of State, Ruth Kelly, MP. No one's ever gone to the DFT yet under a Conservative administration. However, I do know that when the Prime Minister was Mayor of London, he was well aware of the WPL scheme, and I understand that he was considering WPL if it stood for another election as Mayor. So the point is, Cara, yes, there's always going to be politics, but what are authorities asked to do? They've been mandated, many of us, to reduce carbon emissions and get the air clean. How many options have you got to do that? I heard road user charging. I read road user charging was back on the political agenda. There's all sorts of options, and I think we're ongoingly, in an ongoing way, engaging with DFT and a lot of authorities who are actively considering WPL. We have roundtables with the DFT periodically. So we are trying to gauge their appetite for WPL. Nottingham is tried and tested. It works, it's efficient, it's effective. Government arguably, if they're going to ask local authorities to achieve these carbon emission deliverables, they've got to support them with the tools to do so. So nobody can say, I'm hoping my colleagues in Leicester, they're anticipating sending a final business case to the DFT, late spring, summer next year. Watch this space is what I would say.
Do you think there is any sort of specific barriers at the national government level to scaling this up?
I'm not aware of any. However, you don't always get the answers to the questions you ask. As to we generally don't know how national government perceives the WPL. Not directly. We're having a lot of soft information that special advisors to Boris Johnson directly are big fans of the WPL. But until we get a decision on Leicester, one way or the other, Cara, we won't know. Yeah. And just thinking, and sort of alludes to Julian's question to some extent, for small, what's the kind of boundary for when this, in terms of size of the authority, size of the town, that this can work at? That's one of the beauties of the levy. It's very scalable, Cara. In Nottingham, we decided to include all employers within the whole of the administrative boundary. Colleagues at Oxfordshire County Council who are developing a scheme for Oxford were originally looking at an eastern sector that captured the large hospitals and a number of businesses because they felt that's right. I understand that now there's been a change of administration. They might be revisiting that to see whether that was the right level or whether it needs to be smaller or larger. So that's one of the local options you get with WPL. What areas do you want to include? Hounslow, for example, who we're working with, they just want to include a huge industrial estate that will then fund an overland railway into Hounslow town centre. Leicester looking the whole of the administrative boundary. The charging level, if you don't want to raise as much as we did in Nottingham, you pitch your price cheaper. Other authorities potentially talking significantly more than ours. It depends on the area, and also the exemptions and discounts, they're all subject of local choices, what's right for your area. And that's a real strength of the levy, that the legislation is not didactic or too prescriptive at all.
Mm-hmm. And does there need to be a particular profile of businesses? So I guess because you're going to want to provide some kind of exemptions for smaller businesses. Presumably that would exclude certain areas because they're just not going to raise the kind of revenue that you need.
Yeah, it's a good point. I'm reading sort of Libby's comment about living in a rural area with a motorway running through the middle. WPL isn't going to be right for everybody. The London congestion charge is obviously right for that area, but that wasn't going to be right for Nottingham. The WPL places the liability on those employers who are providing car parking fundamentally for their employees. And it's about constraining that provision and generating a revenue stream where those employers still want to continue providing for those people. But we support the employers to try and mitigate their liability downwards through that travel planner, through the grants to encourage cycling and active travel. So it's very much in the set. It's not right for everybody, but it'll be potentially right for an awful lot of authorities, Cara.
Okay, hopefully, Julian, that's answered your question. So I think that unless anyone else has any questions that I've not addressed, I think I have addressed them all now. Although, hold on, no, we've got another question here. So in 2-tier local authority areas, does a WPL have to be run by the Highways Authority, for example, or could either tier run the WPL?
The legislation says that there has to be a unitary authority to bring in a scheme. So if you're a borough council that's not the unitary authority, or a district council, you would have to go to your unitary authority, i.e. probably your county council, to sell the concept to them and get them to support it. Okay.
So just noticing from the chat, Nigel, that Emily Fedorowicz is interested in electrification of fleets. So would definitely like to be linked up to Matt Ralph. So her email is there, Nigel. Hopefully you can see that and make that connection.
Yes, by all means, Emily, I'll be in touch.
Great. Okay. Well, if there are no yes, and indeed, Emily, feel free to connect with Nigel directly if you'd like to after the session. As Kate has pointed out, there's some networking time now. So just checking, no more questions, which there aren't. So I'd like to just say thank you very much to Nigel. As ever, a passionate presentation about the Nottingham Workplace Parking Levy. It is a fantastic scheme, and I hope that this has provided some of the answers that you've been looking for around operating a scheme and some inspiration about doing it. So thank you very much once again, Nigel, and thanks everyone for listening. You can leave the session by pressing the leave button on the top right hand corner, and we'll be having networking in between. Do visit the expo booths as well, and the next workshop begins, let me just check my notes, at 11:40, so look forward to seeing some of you back then. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Get in touch if you'd like to know more, folks. Thank you for listening.